Planning and Zoning Commission, Local Planning Agency, regular meeting for March 8th. We're going to do Invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. Ask everybody to stand. Except for a moment of prayer. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, please help us tonight to do the work of the city. Lord, please protect our first responders, protect everybody around the world, Lord, that's going through strife right now. Thank you for everything you do for us, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, roll call, please.
Chair Lumnick.
Here.
Vice Chair Millen.
Here.
Member Williams. Here. Member Forges.
Here.
Member Kennedy.
Here.
Member Keller, sorry.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The consent agenda, I need a motion for the approval of the minutes.
I'll make that motion to approve minutes from last meeting.
We have a motion, and a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Member Chair and a second by Member Williams to approve the minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Good deal. Old business, none. New business, we've got 619 Hormiga Street, the Van Winkle property. We have Zoning Manager Whitfield.
Good evening, Commissioners, audience. Tonight's variance is for the property at 319 Hormiga Street. The request is to reduce the front building setback for the property. So the issue before the commission is, should the commission approve a 3.5-foot reduction in the minimum front building setback from 25 feet to 21.5 feet for the property to accommodate a 5-foot addition to the existing structure. Just a little bit of background, the site is located in the southeast corner of Orlando Avenue and Banderas Avenue. Banderas is the entrance roadway going into the subdivision. The site is approximately 1/4 of an acre in size. It was built in 1978 and the current homeowners purchased it in 1992. The zoning is R1 and it is a corner lot, and as such it's subject to a 25-foot front minimum setback along both Banderas Avenue and Hormigas Street. This is an aerial of the property and the surrounding zoning districts. This survey shows that the yellow highlight is the 5-foot addition that they want to do. The reason that the variance request is for 3.5 feet is that the house currently sits 26.5 feet away from the property line, so the variance for a 5-foot addition would just be 3.5 feet. For variances, the code requires that we look at several criteria. The first criteria is whether or not there are any special conditions or circumstances that exist on the property and the use. In this instance, the house was built more centered than some of the other ones. On the east side, it's sitting approximately 11 feet to the east property line and 26.5 feet from the west property line. And as you can see in this drawing, if you can see my mouse, this yellow area is the existing garage, so it would make practical sense to expand and add new on the side that's already open, and the greater yard side is on the west side. Adding to the east side had the house been built at the setback line on the east side, the addition could have been accommodated in that space. It'll still leave 7.5 feet, so there a variance wouldn't be requested. However, because it's built that much closer to the east property line, a variance on that side would be a larger variance at 33% than on the west side. The variance is requested simply for the closet space for this existing room, and then a closet space for the addition. The second criteria that we look at is whether or not a strict literal application of the code would cause an undue hardship to the property owner. Staff feels that it would, simply because it's rare that we will see a 3.5-foot wide closet. It's more practical, and the reduction is minimal. The other criteria that we look at is whether or not the variance is needed because of an action that the property owner or that the applicant did. In this instance, they bought the home the way it was, so the variance isn't because of something that they did, other than wanting to add the addition, which is allowed, which is a privilege that most other property owners in the city has. And that's one of their criteria, is that applying this would enable them from doing what other property owners can do in the city. And then the last criteria is whether or not the granting of the variance would confer any additional privileges to this property owner that the city doesn't otherwise grant to other property owners, and that is not the case. So this is the site, and these are the criteria that I mentioned. This is a typo, I'm sorry. The DRC did not vote on this. Variances do not go to DRC, so I apologize for that. Staff recommends the approval of the variance based on the criteria that I've just described for a 3.5-foot reduction to the 25-foot required minimum. And the general contractor is here to represent the applicant if the board has any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Cool.
Just one, there was a fence on that side as well, correct? If I, that they're adding that to?
Yes, they just got a fence permit. That fence permit's been issued and is meeting the 15-foot that's required for a front lot.
So people won't see it anyway from the road.
Yeah. And just to make sure I'm clear, because I know this neighborhood very well, right? Used to live there. The house that's across Hormigas, right? It's on Hormigas in Orlando. It encroaches the side setback already, right? So.
Yes. Oh.
So this is kind of gonna match, not say match, but.
This is 18 feet of the back.
Yes. From here to here is about 18 feet, and
Yeah.
from there to the property line is about 10 feet.
Okay, great. All right, so this is a public meeting. We're gonna open it to the public. Does anybody like to say anything about this? Do you guys have any questions for the contractor at all?
The fence setback, will the building still meet that with the 5-foot addition? It's like 17 feet from the sidewalk?
Yes, because the fence is 15 feet from the property line, this will be 21 and a half, so there will still be
They'll still be within,
Mhm.
okay.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna close the public meeting, bring it back up to the dais. Does anybody have any questions? I need a motion, please.
I'll make that motion to approve, or recommend approval of 319 Farming Street, Van Winkle property, variance number VR 22-01.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion to approve Van Winkle property variance VR 2201 by Vice Member Mellon, and a second by Member Williams. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. Good luck.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, before we go to the next item.
Yes, sir.
Give me an opportunity to introduce Robin Drage, the new
Yes.
Assistant City Attorney. This is her second go-around with being our Assistant City Attorney. And she's going to give you a little brief overview. I don't believe you have heard a special exception project yet. Just a quick overview on that.
Please.
We took it out of your notes, so you didn't jump right into it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robin.
Thank you.
Hello, great to be back here with all of you. Some of you I know, and others I'll be happy to meet when time permits. So tonight you have a couple of special exceptions on the agenda. Under the city code, as you all know, there are two types of uses that are permitted. You have permitted uses that are in the code that are permitted as a matter of right, as long as the project meets the specified criteria. There are also what are known as special exceptions. Sometimes those are also called conditional uses, and these uses are ones that are also allowed under the code, but once certain conditions are imposed to make sure that those uses will not have adverse impacts on the neighborhood, surrounding properties, and so forth. And so it's the applicant's burden here to show that the proposed use is no more burdensome than any use that would be under a permitted use under the code, and that the adverse impacts are not greater in this location than they would be elsewhere. And so you're really looking to add any types of conditions that will make the use acceptable in an area where otherwise it might not be. Of course, if you cannot come up with conditions, staff will certainly have recommendations on that, or you feel that those conditions will not be sufficient to meet those adverse impacts, then certainly you are not required to approve the special exception. And I'm happy to answer any questions if that was too quick of an overview, but basically, if you kind of keep it in mind, more of a, again, it's a use that's allowed only with certain conditions attached that will make it not a particular burden.
What's the main difference between a variance and a special exception?
Well, it sounds very similar, but it's quite different. A variance is something that's really not even allowed under the code. It's where you're giving an exception to the code. A special exception sounds like that, but in truth, it is allowed under the code. It's just, you know, oftentimes you'll see a property where they want to put in a drive-through. And so you want to make sure that there's appropriate stacking available so that the, you know, drive-through line doesn't end up back out on Highway 50, you know, that type of thing. So you're adding these conditions to make sure that the use is appropriate in that particular location. And so there's criteria. You know, of course, it has to comply with the comp plan. It needs to be compatible with other uses in the area or activities that are in the area, you know, adjacent to, not generally throughout the city, but in that immediate vicinity. And also that it doesn't violate the health, safety, welfare, or even convenience of those who reside or work or own land nearby. And so all this gives the city, the Planning and Zoning Board, and the City Commission the opportunity to do is to make sure that this particular use is something that will not create an adverse impact or an undue burden on adjoining properties.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have, was that all you had? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, that is, unless there are
Great.
questions.
Anybody have any questions for the Madam Attorney? Okay, so the next one we have here is the DLC La Gloria Ministry. Hope I said that right. This is a special exception 0121 SE026, and we'll have Zoning Manager Whitfield.
Thank you. So the issue before the commission is, should it act as a local planning agency to recommend approval of the special exception for church use on land that is zoned C2? The property is in the northeast corner of Clark and Silver Star. It's in an existing 59,000 square foot plaza. The entire site itself is just over 7 acres. Table 5-1 is the regulated uses table. And in that table, it says that for church uses in C2, it requires a special exception. This is the aerial of the site, the surrounding zoning districts, and this is a site plan that shows the location of the site and general parking areas. It's noted that the parking is for the entire plaza, not just specific. There are no assigned parking spaces. In terms of the criteria that the attorney mentioned, we do look at 3 main things. The first one is compatibility and consistency with the comprehensive plan and the land development code. Whether or not compatibility is an issue of adjacent property owners and their impacts. And 3 is a big paragraph there, but there are 8 criteria that's under 3 that speaks to both the density, whether or not there's crowding of land, whether or not the improvements would impact vehicular and pedestrian movements, noise, lighting, things of that nature that may be uncharacteristic of a use that would otherwise be permitted by right, as the attorney mentioned, in that same zoning district. So based on the criteria number 1, comprehensive plan consistency, because the use is going into an existing structure, there will be no new construction, no increase in floor area. So in that regard, it is consistent with the comp plan. In terms of code, we looked at it in terms of parking. The big thing that we look at as far as changes in tenancy of a shopping plaza is parking. Staff went out there and looked at the sites and counted all the restaurants and the seating areas. Restaurant parking is based on number of seats, and all the square footages of the existing suite numbers. Based on that and the parking ratio, the proposed use would generate 48 spaces. And the existing shopping plaza has these number of parking spaces per code to meet the retail components as well as the restaurant component and the church component. In terms of compatibility, the comprehensive plan defines it as something that is not in direct conflict with adjacent properties in terms of the density and intensity and the type of uses. Staff feels that a church use is not detrimental or in conflict with residential uses or with other commercial uses. And 3, I mentioned before, the structure is existing, so the use is going to something that's existing, so no new infrastructure that are needed, no new structures are being proposed, so there won't be any impacts to the ability of pedestrians and vehicles to move in that area. In terms of compatibility and buffering needs, this area is in this box here. It's about 300 feet from the nearest residential home. It's separated by a retaining wall, landscaping, and a brick wall, and everywhere else is commercial. So in terms of compatibility, that we didn't see that as an issue. Overcrowding, again, no new structures, no fire hazards, no impact on utilities. So special exceptions do go before the DRC, and they did meet on March 1st and recommended approval. Staff is also recommending approval of the special exception for the use of this C2 site for church use. The applicants, Pastor Nishi and Mr. Omar, are here if you have any questions for them as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just one, only because I remember the discussion downtown when we put in the alcohol down there. We had quite a number of people here for church issues with the fact that it was too close to churches and everything else. You do have a restaurant bar on the other side of Silver Star North Clark. You do have alcohol that's sold by Publix in there. This is one of the few commercial places that you actually have in that District 4 area. So the concern that I have is, what will this do if somebody down the road says, hey, I want to open another restaurant and I want to sell alcohol here in what is a commercial zone? I don't want to see the churches back out here again saying, we've got a problem with this, which is exactly what we saw downtown.
Yeah, so the alcohol distancing requirements would come into play if a bar, a standalone bar, like there was one at the Public Center up on West Road. There was a Tapestry bar, a bar or a liquor store. In this case, it would prohibit Publix from opening up their liquor store on the side, the one they have outside of the Publix shopping center. It would have to meet the distancing requirements to the church. Now, I'm sure they would be doing that lease, and they would help with a variance or from that. But a restaurant is okay. A restaurant that has a bar in it, sort of like we had a Gators Dockside and a Frank's. If you have a bar in there, but it's a part of a restaurant, that's okay. It's
Like
a
a
standalone bar
5150
or a
license?
liquor store, that would come into play, yes. So,
Cool, yeah, like a 5150 license, right? Yeah, not a full-on liquor license. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, sir.
I have a couple questions. The first is, this is a comment on what you just said. There's a similar setup at the other Publix, and there's a liquor store right next to it, Nightly Liquors. From your diagram, I'm a little confused. I hope you'll humor me with some of these. On that west side of that complex, how many businesses are in that there? Is there 3 locations there before you get around the corner?
I meant to bring that with me. I believe there are.
The dance place, there's the Chinese place.
Yes.
Dry
And
There's
crab.
the dry cleaning.
Ice cream.
The ice cream
Ice
right on the
cream
corner.
store.
Yeah,
And are they open on Sunday?
It's only other.
yes, they all have operating hours on Sunday.
And I believe you said that your analysis showed that there were 48 parking places for those to share? Is
Their use would require 40, when I spoke to Pastor Nishi and asked her how much of the suite would be utilized for the main sanctuary. So the parking code says for church uses, it's 1 per 4 seats or 1 per 30 square feet, whichever is greater. So we did the calculation based on 1 per 30 square feet. So that would, based on 1,440 square feet, yields 48 parking spaces. This is, the area that I bubbled is conceptually where they had indicated that they would do the parking, but they can park anywhere. The shopping center has not assigned any designated parking spaces for them. But
Okay, and just to clarify what you said, because you overwhelmed me a little bit. You're saying that solely the service is going to consume, from your estimate, 48 parking spaces?
a church use is based on 1 per 30. So whether it's here or a brand new building, brand new site, it will still be 1 per 30. Based on adding up all the square footages for all of the tenant suites, all of the restaurant seats for restaurant uses, and the church use, which is the only one in that shopping plaza right now. It was at 382 parking spaces that would be required. The site was built with 383 parking spaces.
I'm just forgive me, I'm just very incremental,
Mhm.
and you're losing me with so much information.
Okay.
Your estimate is that when this church is holding service, they will use 48 of the parking spaces, is that correct?
No, what I'm saying is the code requires that the site has 48 parking spaces for this use and 382 for the entire shopping center.
Okay.
Not-
How many seats is have you seen a design of the sanctuary or whatever they call
No,
it? And how
there-
many seats does it hold?
In this instance, we have the stricter of the code requirement is to base it on square footage.
Okay, which is, you're saying the 30
1
square
per
feet?
30. Mhm.
Okay, and how many parking spaces are in that north bubble, just the north bubble that you have there?
That is 25, I believe.
25?
I point to the screen so you can see me. This is 6, 7, 6, and I believe either 7 or 8 here, so about 25.
So about 25. And in the south bubble, what do you?
Combined is about 55.
55?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's bigger.
Thank
but
you
it's-
for that. I have to have that.
No, that's fine.
Thank you. And the additional businesses, have you, as part of your process, have you spoken to the tenants of those other businesses, or are they here? Do you-
No, we didn't speak to all the tenants, but we did get documentation from the shopping center that they only have 1 vacant unit right now, and we did that one based on the 1 per 200 that's required for retail.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mike, I think I need a better understanding with how this would affect, how this would impact a business with liquor again.
Okay, the public shopping center has the leases.
Correct.
They lease to church. If a bar or liquor store, a standalone bar, not 51% food, wants to come in, they have to be within 1,000 feet. They cannot be located within 1,000 feet of a church or school.
Okay.
So it could impact Publix putting in a lease for a bar or a liquor store, not a restaurant. The restaurants are exempt.
Okay.
I mean,
So,
if that, you know,
now,
traffic-
but this would also come into play if you have a unbuilt pad as well. And if that unbuilt pad wanted to be a ABC liquor store or something, that would come into play. We would have to take that into account. But there's no vacant parcels in the area.
Okay.
So
I was
it
gonna
could
say-
come into play, it could affect inline, or if there was a redevelopment
It
of
could
that.
affect, okay. And so the developer is in the C2, and we have this, in the church, is requesting to be in the C2 and potentially affecting future business that fits in the C2.
Yes, in this case, if you physically go to the aerial, for a church, it is door to door. For a school, it is property line from use to school property line.
Gotcha.
You know, so it takes into account playfields. So for instance, if and it's as you travel, so if you had, say, a out parcel was gonna build here and be an ABC liquor, and as you travel, if it was in 1,000 feet, it would be violating that provision of our code. But you could seek relief from that. We did a variance, or when we did something when the High Point Church was going in a commercial district on State Road 50. We said, we don't want this to affect the ability of something to develop. And so we put in a provision where we had the church say, at such time as if there is an alcohol distancing issue, you would not object if staff is recommending. We put that in High Point Church's approval. It didn't wipe out the need for the distancing, but in this case, yeah, it could. Obviously, anything in line to the center, it can affect.
Okay.
If any out parcels were to develop under redevelopment or develop as something new as a bar or liquor store, it could come in, we would have to do that distancing.
Okay.
Our code does not say, except for churches and strip centers.
Okay.
Maybe that's something we could look at, but it doesn't say that today.
Now, with regards to High Point, since you mentioned that, if such situations were to exist, you have to go through them for approval, or you can?
Well, we would remind them at their approval, let's say we had at the Westgate property right next door.
Correct.
If, let's say they did something, like the ABC that's in line, let's say they want to do a standalone, they would not come in, we would have to do the variance, they would have to seek a variance or a waiver under the public hearing process to be that distance from High Point. If High Point came out in objection to it, we would remind them that as part of their large-scale approval to go in there, they said they would not object to any, they don't want something
Okay.
bad next to them that's a bar, but they said they would not object to any uses in the future being
How
located next to
enforceable
them.
would that be?
It's not, it's just something.
I'm asking the attorney.
Okay.
Cough,
You
cough,
see
call
where I'm
road.
going with
It's
this.
as enforceable as I remember it,
Okay.
If I'm not here, no one's gonna remember, so.
Okay, I made my point.
Jason?
Is there something in our ordinance already that, with the church and liquor, since they're leasing and don't own it, wouldn't that still default back to public since they are the?
It's use, not nothing.
Okay. Then my next question is, I was noticing the peak times here is when you can't even find a parking spot at that Publix to begin with. I live right next there, we go there often, and sometimes you're driving around for quite a while to find a parking spot, and even the dry cleaners, oh my God, trying to get in there and find a parking spot is already unbearable.
Right.
And then I think what scares me is an additional 42, spots, at peak usage times from.
Well, it's not, I understand what you're saying. Our code and our purview doesn't deal with your perception. And it's not a new 45 spots. That
Right.
unit, 1,900 square feet, however many it is, was gonna generate trips.
Okay.
It just happens that if this were a daycare or a school, we would be looking at that peak time, because those uses have a different peak generator than the normal use in a strip center. This use is not normal because it's not 8 to 5 or 8 to
Right.
Monday through Sunday. They've got a peak time that just so happens under your perception or is not good based off of how you shop. We can't quantify that and put that as evidence because this is a quasi judicial hearing. We can't say it's the wrong time. This shopping center just happens to be
Right.
popular on Sunday. We can't say that.
I would say plus that side parking lot that's behind, it's not
Yeah.
side, but the one that's behind the gas station, nobody really parks in there that goes to Publix, right?
I don't park over there, so.
Yeah, I would say two questions I have. So first, Ms. Whitfield or Mike, either one, that B lot that still hasn't been done yet, is that over 1,000 feet? The one that's on the other side of Ohio Shores? you know, we did the corner, but
Oh.
then there's that
That was-
smaller lot?
yes. That hasn't been developed yet. It's going through review now for the senior.
The second one's not though. Is that over 1,000 feet?
We have the Everest.
Yeah, Everest is,
Right, there's one next to it.
Yeah,
There's
that would
another
be
open
well
lot.
over 1,000 feet.
Okay,
so.
thank you. So I would say this reminds me of when we did I'm saying that wrong. The church
Horse-
/ civic center there, or whatever it's called, that's in the,
The one on Clark?
yeah,
What
it's
did
kind of
we-
the same
we
thing.
did we
right?
do a variant? I don't remember.
It came up before the commission. It
The
came
city
up before the
commission?
Commission, yeah. I think because of the use.
Well, that one was a change of use from mercantile
Right.
to assembly, and there's
Yeah.
HVAC changes,
Yeah.
distancing, you gotta be able to get a lot of people out quick.
Yeah.
So doors have to be widened, and there was some issues with timing, but not, it wasn't a zoning.
To me,
issue.
that runs the same thing, right? I see how they do it, and there's a lot of people going into that plaza. My only thing about this is, you know, there are not a lot of parking spots right in front of where that's going to be, and of course the Chinese restaurant. There's a lot of people going in and out of there, and I know if I was going to that church, I'd want to park directly in front of it. But you know, so anyway, does anybody else have any questions about staff? If not, I'm going to open it up to the public.
Can we do an amendment or
condition?
an addition to this that
Yes.
discusses and covers the
Yeah, sure.
the issues with alcohol?
Yeah, and just for the applicants, because this is not your typical developer.
Right.
This is just a recommendation board to the city commission. So they make a recommendation for, a recommendation against, a recommendation for, but with all these criteria.
Right.
So, but it's a recommendation that will go to the next level, but you can add conditions. And as the attorney eloquently put, I haven't heard it put that way, is you're kind of, yes, this use is permitted if you can mitigate these issues. And what are those issues? You can add.
Awesome, thank you.
We can't make them put in truck
Right.
truck lots. Would you guys like to come up and speak? Yes. Come on up. You're the next contestant. Just state your name if you would and your address. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, nice to meet you, everybody. I just want to have,
Name and address.
Oh.
Your name and your address.
my name is Nashmaira Lisa Swain. I'm Pastor Nishi, and I live in 621 Kidier Court, Apopka, Florida.
I'm gonna ask real fast, 1 second, I'm sorry. Does anybody have any questions for this applicant before she says anything? Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just want to bring to the board the 2 points. First of all, our service meetings times is usually in the time when it's not the peak time for the shopping center, because we used to use on Sundays. We would like to use on Sundays between 10:30 to 1:30, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 7:30 to 9 p.m. Usually at that time, it's not a peak time for the shopping center. They usually doesn't have that many people around the area. Another thing is we only have 39 chairs for everybody at church. That's including men's, women's, and children's. And we don't have that many people right now at church due to the COVID problem. You know, most of the people, they usually try to, they would like to they prefer, as soon as we start to have the service, they prefer to most of them online, and another ones is gonna be in person. I just want to bring that to the board to take in mind.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Is there anybody else in the public that'd like to make a comment on this? Okay, we're gonna close it up to the public, bring it back to the dais. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, I'll need a motion either way.
I'd like to figure out how we can word the condition before we make a motion.
The recommendation, you mean?
Correct, the recommendation of the condition.
What is the?
You know, like the condition, basically like, if there is a ABC, or if an alcohol, like a liquor store or a brewery opens up right there, that you know, somehow that that would be exempt from the 1,000-foot rule. I just don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is that restaurant that just turns the corner, it changes all the time, right? What happens if it does want to be a brewery
I
one
didn't
day?
think about brewery. I said wine, I said bar, but I was
Yeah.
thinking wine bar or liquor
So
bar. But the
think of
breweries,
a way for us to have a recommendation, Mike, on something like that.
Could we have a recommendation like the one that was used with High Point?
Hold on. I didn't hear, it was actually enforceable.
it's just stating in, well, High Points was, well, we're just, yeah, stating in the public record is just a, hey, you came, to the public we have you on public saying you would not
Right.
oppose if there is a variance
And
needed.
we changed our minds.
Well, I mean, that's
I'm
a
sure the city
verbal
council
agreement of some
Right.
sort, right?
Mr.
Maybe, but
It's tough because on our end, yeah, we're, hours of operation, that's not even, that's sort of tough for us because we don't have that regulation. We're regulators and I can't give you one to, build a
Either
wall
way,
between.
I would
don't
tell the
think
board
there's-
that we can't make that decision anyway, so if you wanna just give that as a recommendation to the city council, when it comes up to them, they can figure out how to enforce that or make that if they'd like.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I don't want to be insensitive, but is it possible there's votes just to deny this?
You may make a motion anytime you'd like.
I'm a no vote, so I will make a motion to deny this special exception request. I believe the commercial use can be used much more profitably for the city, and I believe that consuming 60% of the available parking, 1/3 of the business, is not sustainable.
I kinda, well, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Before we vote, I will ask for comments and I'll make mine first. I would say that does make sense in a point, but at the same time, we have a lot of those strip centers throughout Ocoee, right? There's one at Clark and 50, right? There's and there's one across the street from Clark and 50. There's 4 of them at Silver Star and Clark, right? So I mean, if we start to say we can't put it here, then we can't be afraid to not put it up anywhere in the city, right? That could come close to a bar or restaurant. I agree, it's not in any of the character areas, right? It's not downtown, it's not on the CRA of 50, and it's not in the 429 corridor. So that being said, I wouldn't agree with that. I would vote no to deny it at that point. So, does anybody else have any other comments?
So I will not be in support of denial only because of the factors that are being considered. If we look at the factors being considered, then there's, that we are to consider, I don't see a basis to not recommend approval. If there are additional conditions, I would consider that. I don't see where any enforceable condition is an option here. So I think that it meets, and so I would disagree with a denial of the special exception.
May I comment on that?
Yes.
That's not a requirement, as I understood. It's a requirement of staff, but it's not, we are not limited to that requirement to find an enforceable condition.
That's correct.
And, as Member Mellon said, the park, I use that shopping center a lot on Sunday.
Mhm.
And you can't get in that parking lot to get to that gas station. You can't find a parking spot. And you've got 3 businesses there, and you've got one occupant, tenant, that's gonna consume 60% of the parking. And they're going to have 1.5 and 3 hour stays, which none of those businesses turn those parking lots.
Not
I just don't think it
60%
should
of
happen.
Yeah, where you get
300 and
No, she said,
It's
there's 80,
383.
there's a 25 and a 50, I mean, the 300 are consumed.
right.
by
They have the
shopping.
whole parking lot though. They could go park over by the
But that's
post
packed.
office.
You can't go to Publix.
No, I understand.
And so there's even assuming that those two bubbles are not consumed by the other two businesses, there's a total of 80 parking spaces
Yeah.
there and 48 to 60%.
If that was the basis of your motion alone, I probably would have gone a different way, but the alcohol part, but, so anyway, we have a,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make comments, even though I can't vote on this one. I would be opposed to saying no. I think we should pass this. The thing that I would say, though, is I think you need to put some sort of recommendation in there so that it doesn't get lost going to the city commission, that there needs to be something that's going to protect commercial businesses going forward that want to be put in there. So I would hope with the recommendation, and maybe we need council's advice on how to word that recommendation, but I think we need a motion that includes a recommendation to allow future growth of whatever businesses want to go in there and not be stopped by the fact that they're so close to a church or a school.
okay. and on
I'd
that
also
note,
recommend a no on it as well before the vote, so I don't know if you wanna.
Still gotta take a vote.
No, it doesn't bother me.
Okay.
So on that note, I'm gonna close for questions, and I'm gonna take a vote. All those in favor of denying, please say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of opposing, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It does not carry 3-1, right? It's not.
2.
3-2, the motion doesn't carry.
All right, I'm gonna make a try. I'm
Do you
gonna
need
try
to
to make a
take a-
stab at this.
Hang on one second, do you need to take you got that, the vote on it? Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna recommend, or I'm gonna make a motion to recommend approval with a condition that no attempt to stop any sales of alcohol within the 1,000-foot ordinance.
Okay. But but before that though, you're approving the special exception.
I am approving this, the recommendation of approval of the special exemption, but adding a condition that basically it said the tenant will make no attempt to stop the sales of alcohol within the city's 1,000-foot ordinance.
Okay, I have a motion by, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, right now we have a motion by Vice Chair Mellon with a second by Member Williams to approve the special exemption request with a recommendation that city staff, I'm gonna try to make this the right way, Mike, tell me if I do it wrong. To ask for a recommendation that city staff, in their presentation to the council, also tell them what we've asked about today here
Okay, yeah,
with the
so
liquor
the
issue.
alcohol reference is chapter 38, and it is specifically 38-5. So that a condition that they would not be, that the 38-5 will not prohibit a use in that, yes.
That
within
they would
one-
give that the
Yes.
user would give approval to waive 38-5.
Yes.
With the city council's approval. Okay, we got that? You good? I'm good.
The only caveat, though, is it's not a recommendation. It is recommended, let me rephrase that. It's a recommendation of a condition added to it.
You say so.
I'm not very
And-
well.
And it is a
Ma'am?
excuse me, it is a recommendation for approval
With the
to the commission.
With a
Yes.
condition.
With a condition.
That's correct. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, all those in favor of approving the special exemption on project number 0121 SE026, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
And
I believe-
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, it is a special exception. I think we've kind of gotten the terminology to exemption, but it's exception.
My paper says exemption.
Should be
Says
exception.
It says exception, I can't spell or read. So,
Just to make sure we're.
I didn't go to school at West Orange High School. I really didn't. Okay, so, that carried, that approved 3-2. Is that correct? Cool. Good luck. Next up. That took way much longer than I thought it was going to. Okay, next up we have Blueford Avenue Daycare. This is a special exception, 0122 SE027, and we have zoning manager Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the issue for this site is whether or not the commission should recommend approval of a special exception for a childcare use on land that is zoned C2. The site is approximately 125 feet south of the Main Street and South Blueford Avenue intersection. The site is shown there. It has 2 parcels. Combined, it's approximately 2.5 acres. Again, like before, Table 5.1 sets the uses allowed by right, prohibited, and allowed by special exception. And in that table, childcare uses require a special exception approval to move forward. The childcare portion will occupy the area in the north highlighted in pink. This is the current aerial, a couple years old. It's still wooded. The surrounding zoning, it's completely surrounded by C2 and C3 zoning districts. As previously discussed, we evaluate the request based on consistency with the comprehensive plan, compatibility with adjacent uses, and the impacts of that proposed use or structure on the surrounding property owners. This is a site, it's conceptual in nature at this time. A thorough site plan review will happen if the city ends up approving the special exception. As shown here, the childcare is on the north side. It's approximately 10,000 square feet. Play area is on the north. It fronts Blueford. Blueford is, I think, being designed for streetscape landscape improvements. The parking will be internal to the site. As part of a requirement by staff is in this site plan, the special exception would include a medical office building. They will share an access point. The reason why we asked the applicant to provide this site plan is to go through all the other all the other criteria in number 3. The site plan shows that the site will not violate the comprehensive plan's limitations on floor area ratio. Based on the site size, the site can accommodate a little over 300,000 square feet of commercial built to the max. They are proposing something that is well below that, both for the childcare and for the medical office. In terms of compatibility, there is an apartment complex, town center on the east side. North is vacant. The north and the west property is one lot that is still vacant, and that lot would front on McGuire. So the parking, the dumpster, one of the elevations, the west elevation that you'll see in a moment, it's all anticipated to be back of house for this site and the one to the west. In terms of parking spaces, what they're showing here, the site can accommodate the parking for both use for the childcare use. We're still looking at the parking for the medical office based on the previous square footage it met, but in between the first and second, it went up from 4,000 square feet to 6,000 square feet. So there is room to provide the additional parking spaces once we do an actual site plan review. So in terms of elevation, the top figure, the top image shows the east elevation that's facing Blueford. The bottom one is the west elevation showing the back of house to the vacant lot on the west side. The top picture is, I attempted to paste the 2 elevations together since it came in 2 different sheets. The top one is the main entrance, the main frontage of the building facing internally to the parking lot and the medical office building. Same thing with the north side. That is what drivers would see as they travel along Main Street. The DRC discussed this item at their March 1st meeting. After a lengthy discussion, they ultimately recommended approval subject to 3 conditions. The first condition is the limited use of that building material IFAS. We are recommending that they build according to the architectural designs of the downtown redevelopment area, that the design of the knee wall, which is right now, right here, could be adjusted so that maybe a little bit to the north, a little bit to the south, in order to create an emergency entrance here, because they have just the one limited access as a right in, right out with the future improvements to Blueford. This will be a landscaped median, so this access will be limited by a right in, right out. And then the third condition is to coordinate with the planning office and the CRA office if Blueford's improvements turn out to need some additional right-of-way. And then they would look at that at the time of site plan review. So with that, staff is recommending an approval as well, subject to those three conditions. And Mr. Hewell's here representing the applicants if you have any questions for either of us.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for staff?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just wanna make sure I understand, I think I understood you, but I wanna make sure. The ingress and egress, you're trying to make it so that it's one way in, one way out. Did I misunderstand you?
The design of Blueford right now, it shows this area of Blueford
Right.
being a landscaped median.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, it's just an open bi-directional turning area, a twiddle. With the landscape improvements to Blueford, that section will be a landscaped median. So it would limit their ability to turn left into it and also to turn left out of it.
Okay, that's what I heard. Okay, that was my question. My other concern is, do we know, is this, if I'm familiar with this company, because I've seen it other places, is it, gonna be 24-hour kinda, or more than the regular, and maybe that's for the applicant,
Yeah.
but
And-
the hours of operation,
Okay.
is it night and day, daycare?
We'll have the applicant give that answer. But Mr. Chairman, I did want to interject. I failed to mention this to Anach. I handled the DRC meeting for this for her. And this area is in the CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency's Target Area 1. But we had to, because of the right of the gas station, the racetrack, we did in Target Area 1, we did a sub-area, A and B. And this is sub-area A. We call it the suburban swath along Blueford. And so we don't have the strict tight urban development like we have going east of there. So I just want to put that in there. This isn't an overlay, but it's in the one we gave the least amount of requirements because we had to let this gas station in, and we just made what's called the suburban swath. And so we tried to get the other building up on the road, but the whole site doesn't have to be urban. Where city center is behind, that all requires the urban, really dense urban development. So I just wanted to put that out there. So.
Mike and Manager Whitfield, I ask this every time, and I'm going to keep on asking again. This user doesn't have any restaurants we can put in this area because that's what we need the most is restaurants.
Go to the aerial. Well, the city center, and they're going to give so everything to the. We have several 100,000 square feet, or we got 50. Come on, you can get there. You can get there right here. This is where the 8-story building is going, with the 2 first floors of retail restaurant. What you see is the foundation for the parking garages. They are now in for the foundation work for the building that will be wrapped around it, and they're designing it. They're going to be giving an update at the next Community Redevelopment Agency meeting in June. But this is where we're going to get that really dense urban lifestyle center. And the same owner of City Center owns this piece and owns this piece and everything on the north side, and they also own this parcel. So we still have a lot of opportunities for restaurant, but that's going to come with this lifestyle. This is a parking garage with retail on the first floor, then it has 3 or 4 story of apartments above it. And then we have these apartments. So there's still this isn't taking the final standalone piece where we can get a restaurant. But.
Okay. The applicant wants to come up?
I had some more questions.
Oh, you have staff questions?
I do.
A couple of questions.
Okay, sorry. Thought you wanted to go to dinner.
On the third page of the staff packet, it says the use of IFIS materials to be limited in the area. Can you explain that point that you're making? And I saw that it's drive-it. Is that supposed to be EIFS, or what is that?
Is it EFS or?
EFS. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
got it.
the
EIFS.
styrofoam, skin.
Yeah.
yes.
Got it, okay. Is there, are we trying to limit the use of IFAS?
Yes.
It seems to make that point. Can you explain why and what the impact of this project is? Do you have a capacity or?
No, under the more strict side of the target area, we do limit, we want multiple materials.
Okay.
And it's just, so it's sort of some of the give and take.
Yeah,
So we would rather not have a lot of that material. It just, it has a characteristic to not age well if not maintained, especially from the ground up. And so we want to make sure we get the mixture of materials.
well, that, I was wondering, thank you, as you know, I'm familiar with that material, and it's typically not recommended for projects like this, as you just said, where there's going to be damage from the ground, like children playing at a daycare, because the foam is fragile. I was wondering if that was where you were going, but I wasn't sure. Thank you, that's my question.
My questions were actually in line of that too. So, limited use of EFS and what have you, so I'm assuming that this is a metal building and what have you. So, within your downtown redevelopment, we do not already have what a building should be constructed of already established?
It's in there. I remember seeing it. There are some standards I saw in there in terms of
Okay.
the brick and stuff and.
Well, except for this northern part on Blueford, we didn't have this on there?
This isn't in the downtown, this is covered in the CRA target area, which does
Okay.
have architectural requirements.
Gotcha.
Yes.
What is the typical zoning for daycare?
Daycares are like schools, they're special exceptions. So they're, again, it's, as the attorney eloquently put, may or may not be appropriate in this area. And so that's why I wanted to kind of give just a little preface on the suburban swath. If this were next to city center, it would most likely be a different recommendation. This just happens to be in that place where,
Correct.
so, on
And
our
what
side,
limit- and
maybe
what
not your
limitation-
side.
And what limitation would this business serve on other businesses, if any?
What was that?
Being the
would-
daycare in the C2, what limitation would that serve
Yeah,
to other
a
businesses?
daycare, unless it provides a certain type of, up to preschool, because a preschool is considered an elementary school. In some instances, could, if it's heavy on the preschool side, if it's not infants up, it could, if it's determined to be more of a school, you get into that siting. But as a daycare, it would not have the alcohol.
Does that include VPK, like pre-K age, since schools pay for
I think it's
VPK?
K through 12 is the official registered schools with DOE.
Okay. Anybody else
So
have any questions?
this one would just be, from our review, we looked at the outside playground.
Mhm.
That's and in this area, it's on McGuire side or on the north side, that by the cut-through road, I think you're gonna have more of the use on McGuire in the bigger area to the west. And so where the daycare kind of backs here and you have that active use adjacent there, we didn't see that as being a detriment.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right, now we can bring the gentleman up. Just state your name and your address.
Good evening, Chairman and fellow board members. My name is Jonathan Hewells. I'm with the Lowndes Law Firm, 215 North Eola Drive, Orlando, 32801. It's been a pleasure working with Mr. Rummer and Ms. Whitfield on this project. It's been a few months in the making. There was several pre-apps that were conducted and feedback given and feedback taken back, and it kind of changed the project over time, and what you've been presented here today is a kind of culmination of that process, and we're thankful to have staff's recommendation for approval. We concur with staff's recommendation. We have no issue with the recommended conditions of approval. In terms of the actual operator of this site, it will be an O2B Kids, which is based and founded out of Gainesville, but now has 30 locations statewide, starting to expand into Georgia. They are somewhat unique. They do not franchise, so they operate all of their facilities from corporate headquarters, so there isn't any franchising of them. In terms of hours of operation, being proposed for this site would be 6:30 in the morning to about 7 p.m. I mean, obviously, you know, there won't be many, if any, children that'd be there the entire time, but obviously it caters to if someone needs to have child care for just a few hours in the morning or a few hours in the afternoon. They really cater to the ages from prior to kindergarten in terms of daycare, and then also at some after-school programs. So.
Yeah, I asked the question, just if I can follow, Mr. Chair. I grew up in Gainesville, watched this business grow, et cetera, so when I saw it, I did recognize it. Well, I'll save my comments for later, but my other question for you is, in terms of protecting the playground area, because it is on Blueford right now. Blueford's not, you know, overrunning, but I am concerned about the children and their access to, because children are prone to wander and they wander out sometimes. Is there anything to protect the children from that? Is that going to be part of your design, either internally or externally? Also, by any chance, is there anything, I still have horrors of a daycare being run into here locally. So are there any plans to put protections to prevent something like that from occurring as well?
Well, first of all, the playground area will be limited access. I mean, it will be at the very least fenced so that there won't be the opportunity for any child to leave that area and wander off property. And so I think that concern should be handled. Sorry, it's not shown on the site plan. And then in terms of setbacks, we kind of have a yin and yang, because I think it's kind of the desire of this overlay that they want to bring the buildings as close up to the property line as possible. And I think we worked with staff to try to address that concern by turning the building and just putting one side of it, and then putting the medical office aspect more consistent with what they would like to see in the CRA. But it still is, you know, not right on the right of way. I think there's a fair amount of distance. I can't recall. 10 feet off of it, and it is the short side of the building.
Okay, thank you.
That'll eventually, when that road's widened, right, there's gonna be streetscape and sidewalks on both sides, and
Right.
so that's, you know, there's gonna be a trail, I believe, right?
I don't believe the Blueford will be widened. Based on my conversation with
Yeah.
the CRA administrator, just
Wider
wider
sidewalks.
sidewalks within the existing right-of-way lines.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any other questions for the applicant? Okay, we're gonna open it up to the public. Does anybody have any questions from the public? Okay, we're gonna close it up, bring it back to the dais. So that knee wall will just extend on the front side of that parking spot, and it won't go to the side of the daycare over to the play area, right?
The purpose of the knee wall is really to screen the
Just to screen the parking lot.
and vehicular lights going onto the road facing the apartment complex.
And then we just saw, once we as a DRC were looking at it all together, and with the applicants, we saw a possibility to maybe move the knee wall and create just like a 16-foot decorative fence that could be, if needed, removed for a public safety vehicle. So the knee walls will still block a majority of the parking, is kind of what you want in that downtown feel, but there is that opportunity. and we'll refine that, but, so.
Did you guys look anything up with the code while we were talking? I saw you.
We did.
This, yeah,
I wanted to point out that currently the city doesn't allow in table 5-1 a daycare or childcare in any zoning district as a use by right. So it's either prohibited or a special exception. So right now it's sort of limiting.
And I'm going to ask the applicant to come up one more time. I'm sorry. I'm going to open it back up to the applicant. Does their program have a VPK program now?
I know some of their facilities do have a VPK program. They are limited. I mean, it's not the dominating
Okay.
program that's run, but it's really just kind of a demand. You know, obviously, I think it depends on what their
Okay.
what the demand in the community is.
And the statute is pretty clear, right? Kindergarten, not pre-kindergarten for the
For
liquor.
the liquor license. I think you confirmed it was
But
K
this-
through 12
this
for.
church, schools registered with the official school
Won't they,
age children.
if they do have VPK, won't they have to register as a school because doesn't that take?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
'cause
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for staff? If not, I need a motion.
So I'll make the motion to approve, or recommend approval of the special exception with conditions for 880 South Blueford Avenue, project number 0122SE027, with the conditions as listed.
Great, thank you. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Member Williams and a second by Vice Chair Member Mellon to approve the special exception request for daycare use in C2 zoning for project 0122SE027. Any other comments?
Just a small comment, I just want to say that, daycares, if we're really talking about jumpstarting our economy again as we've gone through COVID and, trying to get our workforce back up, getting people back to work, childcares, daycares are integral to that. And so I think this was an important project and I'm glad that we're supporting it.
Wish there was a restaurant there. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Perfect, it carries. Good luck. Thank you. All right, next up, we have Innovation Montessori School, Special Exception 0122SE028. And we have Manager Whitfield again.
Thank you. Hey, sorry to sound like a little broken record. So the issue is, should the Planning and Zoning Commission, acting as the local planning agency, recommend approval for a special exception for school use on land zoned C2? Background, it's in the southeast corner of Olympus Drive and Silver Star, about 200 feet south. It's approximately 4.3 acres. The site was previously approved a special exception for a K-5 school, and it's already been built, so the site is already constructed for a K-5 school. This is the current aerial, surrounding zoning districts, the same criteria that we've discussed previously: compatibility with the surrounding properties, consistency with the comp plan, and the impacts of the use and structure on the surrounding properties. I would like to point out something that's a little bit different in this particular special exception, in that the comp plan states that middle schools and high schools shall be placed in the commercial zoning district, and a commercial future land use designation, and this is a commercial future land use designation. This is a site plan. It essentially is the K-5 site plan that was approved a few years back. I do apologize for the orientation. It's the only way to fit it on the screen in a legible way. North is going to the left. Here, Silver Star. So north is on this side. The Winn-Dixie, the rest of the shopping plaza is up here. In terms of this special exception, the change in the use from a K-5 to a high school, the biggest consideration that staff looked at was in terms of the parking and stacking. They've demonstrated here that they can provide 48 stacking spaces. The entrance to the school site remains here in the north portion of the site, northeast portion of the site. Comes in this way, it loops around, children are dropped off here, and then exiting out to the shopping center. There are existing language provisions in the original land use plan, I'm sorry, in the original, I believe it was an agreement, a development agreement, in terms of the ability for this site to access the rest of the shopping center. So they have three ingress, egress locations. The full access on Clark, limited access on Clark, and also limited access on Silver Star. In terms of traffic, the change in use going from elementary school to high school was a negligible increase in terms of the operation of the site. In terms of utilities, it's also not an issue because it was previously approved. The utilities are going there as part of the permit for the school construction initially. The other thing I wanted to point out is with the previous K through 5, because it was a brand new site, it had its own set of conditions of approval, which essentially expires once this site, if the site gets approved, and staff is recommending, and the applicants have agreed to impose these two new conditions, their own conditions of approval. Given that elementary school students are, it's hard to say this in a public setting, but less rowdy than high school students, we had asked them, and the applicants agreed to put in conditions, number 2, that before school and after school meetings or activities are not permitted to be held on the property before 7 a.m. or after 6 p.m. Mondays through Sundays if such activities result in excessive noise, lighting, things like that or overflow parking that are not characteristically expected for uses that are allowed in the C2. We also put in a provision in the condition that they cannot park within the right-of-way, and they cannot park on unimproved surfaces. The first condition basically says that this special exception approval would apply to this specific user, the Montessori school, and if the operator were, and it's not transferable, so if they were to change, it would have to come back to the city for another round of review and approval. At the DRC meeting, DRC recommended approval without any conditions, and staff is also recommending approval. And the applicants are here representing the Montessori school. If you have
Great.
any questions for them.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Talk about, you mentioned the egress into this. How is that going to happen with the shopping center parking lot versus Olympus?
Versus
Is that-
Olympus, there's no access point from Olympus.
Right.
There's a wall and a steep hill.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I can. Thank you. And I guess 2 questions, and I think you may have partially answered one of them. High school parking. There will be enough spaces for
Yes.
since K through 5, obviously the students didn't drive, but now with
Mhm.
high school, there's the possibility.
Yes, the parking ratio, we analyzed the site for K through 5 and elementary school parking ratio is different from the high school parking ratio. The site has already provided, when it was built, more parking spaces than what the high school would be required based on the number of students. 1 for 10. Elementary school students is 1 for 30. High school is 1 for 10, and then 1 per classroom and 1 per employee. That would have required, I want to say it's 55 or 56. There are about 100 parking spaces.
Okay. And the second question goes back to the same question as earlier, and that is, in the special exceptions, is there anything, since they're even closer to some of the alcohol in the area with the restaurants and bars, do we need a special exception on this or recommendation for an exception on this as well? So that, again, in a commercial area, if the Mexican restaurant decide to become a bar instead of a restaurant, are we gonna have the same issue?
It's already a school now. Well, it was
Well,
already
it was a school now, once it no longer became a school, and this was brought up at the time when it was first a school, was what is this gonna do to the areas around it? And now that anything that was put in place would fall off once it's no longer the K through 5, do we need to put something in place to make sure that we don't have any issues with anything that might wanna come in later, like a wine bar or a brewery or
Well-
anything else in there?
The site right now is vacant because the elementary school went away. It's still allowed to operate as an elementary school, so even if this user were to go away, another elementary school could occupy it, or they could move their K-5 here because the special exception rides with this property. Unlike this one, it wasn't specific to a user.
But we did take into account, we did put in any provisions at that time to the issue you raised. It could, I mean, the Frank's is far enough and it's a restaurant as well, so
I
it.
just look at,
but-
if a brewery went in there, if a wine bar went in there, are all of a sudden we gonna run into the problem that,
Yeah.
oh no, we can't have it
Yes.
there because we're too close to a school?
Right, this is considered a public school, and it would, within 1,000-foot distance, even anything, oops, sorry, let me get back there. Even anything out in those out parcels would prohibit that, yes, and it would do anything in line here. So it would, the existing special exception does the same thing. This change to this school, this particular applicant is not bringing that. That condition is there. So it
Okay.
does give you an opportunity to remedy that.
I have two questions
sense.
for you on this, Mike. I'm gonna ask you this one, Mike. Have you seen any users at all that have been any kind of interested in making the old Winn-Dixie a multi-entertainment center, or where they would have a bar in it, or I'm just,
Yeah.
thinking.
No, the only hint we had was, one of the dollar stores has a grocery, and they were looking at taking up half the Winn-Dixie, but
Yeah.
that's the only talk I've ever heard of anything.
So if they put a school there, and let's say, XL Entertainment wants to come in and put a thing like Game Time, right?
It's a
Well,
restaurant.
it's a
It's a
restaurant.
restaurant, yeah, so,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
It would be this would prohibit a dance club, a Tijuana,
What?
a bar.
Yeah, gotcha.
I was gonna say Tijuana Flats, but no, I'm saying.
Do you dance at Tijuana
No,
Flats?
so there's anyways,
Okay.
and it would stop a bar, nightclub from coming in there.
And the other thing is, I don't want to keep on this coming up every time, right? This is something now, it's come up twice now. So, is this something that other planning and zoning boards you've seen in the past have had questions about when these schools come up, and about, I know we're changing, right? So we're trying to add more bar type alcohol thing, but I just don't want this to come up every time we have something like this to say, hey, we need a provision to send to the council, you know what I mean?
I mean, it's sad we actually have to do this, and Orange County won't come up and build the schools that we actually need, and they want to,
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's we need the schools, and Montessori is a good person. I mean, we've had them here for a long time, and they've done extremely well by us. So I have no problem with Montessori.
Yeah.
Again, my concern is we're right up against our commercial areas, and I hate to all of a sudden see a commercial area stop its growth just because it was a good idea to put a school at the time, and that's my only concern there. So if we could do something to mitigate that, I'm all for it. I love what you all have done so far. You're great partners for us, really.
All right, great. If the applicant wants to come up.
Good evening, everyone. Elisa Sowell with Schatz & Bowen, 300 South Orange Avenue, Orlando, Florida, 32801. I'm here on behalf of Innovation Montessori. I have Patrice Cherico and Brett Casey with Innovation Montessori here with me tonight. We agree with staff's recommendation. We want to thank them for all of the work that they've put in over the past few months, going back and forth with us. traffic study and the site plan, and coming up and agreeing on these conditions, which we also agreed. I want to address the restaurant comments and the stopping the growth comments. This property is existing as a school. We're not, there's no stopping of any growth. Any other commercial property such as a Starbucks or a bank could also fill these lots. And there are a number of other C2 vacancies that are around. We've seen on some of the other projects as well. And I'd also like to focus on the program that Innovation Montessori is specifically bringing to this site. It's providing additional and a unique opportunity for the high school students in the city of Ocoee to participate in what they call an innovation incubator. So they're gaining more than just what a typical high school experience is. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and there are lots of opportunities for specific standalone liquor stores or bars, not precluding restaurants or Starbucks. But I think having the focus on the ability to have unique opportunities for the students in this area as well should be very welcome. So with that, we are here to answer any questions, and we hope for your support.
So this will take the high school campus off the original campus now?
Yes.
So it'll relieve some of that
Yes.
Issue that's going on there, right? Which is crazy. And so right now, looking at this map, the only entrance and exit's going to be out the side of the parking lot, right? Because where I see this, where this asphalt is, that's going through a lot that's not been sold yet. So eventually, will that have access to when they figure out what to do with these front lots?
Yes.
So right now, the only way to get out of this place is to go in front of the pool supply store.
Correct, but I would like to note that the hours of operation would likely be very different.
Is this gonna be like a 7:20 to, is that the hours of operation?
7:30, 3:30.
We go 8:30 to 3 o'clock.
Okay, cool. Does anybody have any other questions for the applicant? Great, thank you very much. This is a public hearing, we'll open it up to the public. I do have one comment here from John Finger. If you wanna come on up and just state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. John Finger, 1513 Acropolis Circle, and I live in Lake Olympia, which is the adjacent property there. I like the idea of the school, so I'm 100% in favor of that. Most of the questions were answered. The parking is not my concern. It'd be a student's concern to be able to get in and off the property. I think that's been dealt with. The only thing that kind of just popped up as I was reading through it, one of the conditions there was about exterior lighting after 6 o'clock type of thing. Is there a provision or plans to put in these grandstand lights and stuff like that over there and speakers? Because I used to live in a neighborhood that was not too far from a high school, which had football games that would go on late and all kinds of stuff that goes on with fourth down and a foot yelling in your backyard. So again, that would be the only concern I had was lighting, noise, and any possible effect to the neighbors who live in those 5 adjacent lots there. Other than that, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is the basketball court indoor basketball? Okay, it's just it's a hard turf basketball court, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. There's no gymnasium or anything like that? Okay, great. No tennis courts? Okay, great. Anybody else have any, thank you very much. Does anybody else in the public want to speak? If not, we're gonna close the public comments and bring it back up to the dais. Does anybody else have any other questions for staff? If not, I need a motion either way, please.
Make a motion.
Sorry?
I'll make a motion.
Oh, great, thank you. I have a motion by member Kennedy. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second by member Forges. So we have a motion to approve the special exception request for school use in C2 zoning, which is project 0122 SE028, and a second from member Forges. Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries. Good luck. Can't wait for you guys to get that campus off the other campus.
Nice, something there.
We're really excited. Thank you very much.
That represents growth. We're looking
All
forward
right.
to it.
So our next, we have number E, political sign ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item, it's a land development code update. Political signs is under the Article 8 of the Land Development Code under signs. And currently, the provision in the Land Development Code only speaks to you have to remove a political sign. Well, one of them is you have to remove it within 48 hours. There's also a provision that they can't be on vacant property. They can be on residential and on vacant property without approval, and they've got to be, there's a separation between the number of signs, and then the provision to clean them up. In a couple of the last city commission meetings, it has been brought up that there are some political signs that have been up for years that have not gone away. Some are on city property within the city limits. Some of them are within the county that may seem like it's within the city limits. And specifically, Commissioner was asked to bring back something to deal with political signs. And so as staff, we looked at our current regulations, and we met with staff and city management and the city attorney and kind of said what, if and what, and went through different scenarios. And what we came up with is because we have a city limits, but they're not very defined everywhere, and there are properties that are unincorporated county, we said, okay, let's look at the political sign issue and what sort of the issue is. They're up way before an election. We looked at what Orange County has, which is the properties that are not in the city or in the county, and the county has a 90-day, can't be up within 90 days of an election or a referendum, and they have to be moved within 10 days of the election. And we said, okay, well, what if we looked at items such as, what about qualifying? Well, qualifying for federal, state, local, city is all different. We have city elections that are in March, and you have elections in November, and you have runoffs, and there's stuff like that. So we said the easiest way to fix the problem is if you see a sign around, it's either in the city or in the county, and it's this, we modeled what we're proposing is modeling the counties for the early duration. You cannot have a sign up within 90 days.
Right.
Then we are adding that instead of the 48 hours, because you're looking at volunteers, you might be celebrating, give them 5 days. Not 10 days as the county, but 5 days you got to get them removed.
Yep.
So what we are going to propose in an ordinance is to create a new requirement that you cannot have a political sign earlier than 90 days to an election or a referendum. We're going to change the requirement to pick them up from 48 hours to 5 days. We're not going to mess with the section that talks about spacing. We're not amending that. We don't do a good job of coding that. What the difficult part is on properties, right of entry and measuring and what's 40 foot and so we have provision for sign size, we have provision residential, they can go if it's on vacant, they can't be in the right of way. So what we're looking to try to, in this first go around, just let's make sure they're not up before 90 days. And let's make sure they get put away and they're not in the right of ways. From there, things will come up, things will happen, and we didn't try to fix every scenario, but we said, let's not be different than the county, because if we have a sign and it's in the county, in the city, at least if you see a sign up and it's 90 days before March or November, you look it up, okay, you're good, you're not. So that's what we are proposing, those amendments.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Jason?
I got a few. I mean, as most know, I've been working on this for months, 2 months now. It's been a pretty big issue. I like some of what was added. I still think it's too vague. One of the issues I have is most political signs, I've read other city ordinances that around Florida, usually they'll have to be a paid for by, something like a 2-inch or something that is visibly seen from the roadway on the sign, and then there's usually a fine attached. and then it'll say whoever paid for this political sign will, it's not gonna be removed by the city, it's gonna be, you're paying for it, and the city is gonna remove it. There's nothing in our ordinance that talks about who's gonna incur the cost of removing the sign.
Wouldn't that fall under code enforcement or abatement?
Well, but you've got to okay, my first question is, we don't have right of entry to go on the property.
Right.
We have right of entry with a permit. If we permitted every political sign, then we would have right of entry, but we don't have right of entry to go on, to step on the property and touch anything.
Well, that was my next point.
But then also code enforcing, the sticker, is the sticker there? If you code enforce it, you're code enforcing the property owner. They have 10 days to fix the problem, then it gets scheduled for a hearing. So there's creating work that can you really, at the end of the day, police and find but keep going.
Hang on 1 second, Jason. I'm sorry. Madam Attorney?
Yes, thank you. One thing regarding the requirement on, what the sign says, those are under the state election law. So those kinds of issues regarding, paid for and all of that, it's already a state law requirement, and if someone violates it, then, they're violating state election law.
Right, so does that mean the city, because right now, not one sign that's up has the state legal,
Well, and that would be up to the state for enforcement
Okay.
through, a sanction against the actual candidate for not complying
Or like
with
going through the
what
DA or-
what the requirements are.
gotcha. Then my last one was, I know we already have some signs that are up on private property without the express permission of the people who own that property, and I was reading a few cities, I can't name, on large signs that were on public roadways, there was a ordinance or provision that if it's on private property, that the erector of the sign had to get a signed letter from the owner of the property and submit it to the city. So that way, if they don't, that kind of negate
Yeah.
or, talks about.
Okay. So on vacant property, you're allotted a signed size. Well,
32 square foot.
I guess that the way we would police, we don't want to create a process where we can't collect fees, because so we're doing a bunch of work for free, and you really at the end of the day. So I guess what you're saying is, if we had that provision and we were having issues with the property, then we could say, well, do you have the letters of authorization to have the sign? That's something to look at. Okay, I see what you're saying.
And so, I mean, but where do you draw, because I agree, I was gonna ask a question about an unimproved property with, a billboard sign on it on, say, the corner of Orlando Avenue and Clark Road, right, that have been there for 12 years, whatever. But how do you differentiate the difference in that and an unimproved property that's in a subdivision that's maybe a lot by itself that has a small sign on it, right? So
If it's unimproved in a residential, it's not permitted.
Our current ordinance already kind of covers the smaller signs,
Yeah,
are pretty
yeah.
much exempt. We're
Right.
talking about the ones that gotta go through the post hole diggers,
Right.
so
So-
you're right, how do you verbate,
Right.
like, it's like, right now is, you can go up to 32 square foot. Not
Yes.
one sign in the city right now, they all exceed it. If they exceed 32 square foot per the city ordinance already, they have to already go to the city and
To
get a
that
permit.
approved,
and-
and we haven't had a permit for a sign
Right.
in yet. And
So
so
any of the
what that would
larger-
allow us to do then is say, code enforcement, contact property owner, hey, you have some political signs that don't meet our criteria. First off, do you have approval for them to be there? No. Okay, do we have right of entry to remove them? And I can't commit that we would do that. It's a sensitive subject, that's a decision, but I see what you're saying. So that's another area to look at, yes.
yes, ma'am.
Another thing I would point out is if it's a violation of code and there's a code enforcement proceeding, any fine runs with the land. So it really is against the owner of the
Yeah.
Right.
property, even if they didn't give permission. I mean, let's face it, if the owner of the property has a sign there, they don't want it there, they have the right to remove it. If they fail to, and they're subject to a code enforcement proceeding, and their fines are levied, then that
They're-
runs
Right.
against them.
Well, one of them is over 80 years old, and, so that's where
And the property owner apparently doesn't care, but if there was a code enforcement action against the property owner and they started getting a fine of X number of dollars every day, they might have a different, and it can turn into a lien and a advantageous to at least have the requirement that they come and say to the owner, hey, I need your permission. But, you know, again, there isn't a
Right.
mechanism to enforce it.
I got you, that one.
But the
that could be
mechanism
one
right
of the-
now is not even being
Do the
enforced. I
larger
think that's the problem,
signs-
you know?
Mike, do the larger signs, you know, example, the ones I was just talking
Yeah.
about, or do those need to be permitted?
Yes, there's a process, just like a temporary real estate sign of that size would have to. So under the provisions, you're allowed a 4x8. You can have it any which way, but you can do that.
Anytime you put a 4x4 post in the ground, right, you need a permit for
No,
that.
you can do the 4x8. You can do a 32 square foot political sign without the permit. Anything larger than that has to go through and be reviewed.
If we want to try to make action on the candidate and not the,
Yeah.
you can't make it permittable?
We cannot, it's, the property owner would have to apply for the permit.
Right,
Gotcha.
but it's on city roadways though.
If it's
so-
in the right of way, we can remove
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
We
those signs
should-
aren't in right-of-ways.
Right.
Yeah, right, they're
They're not
just
in right of
beyond
ways.
it on private
Yeah,
property.
they're on the property, they're not, and having been there, done that, because I've gone and gotten those permissions from Texas, because some of our property in District 4 is owned by people in Texas. And I literally called him and got the approvals that I could put the property on there. But I also know that he told me that none of the other candidates that had been running against me over the different various elections, not just the most recent, but over any of the 12 years that I sat there, had asked for permission, and he had not given permission to anybody else to put signs up. So the thing is, somebody like that, now all of a sudden, he doesn't know let's face it, he lives in Texas. He doesn't know there's a sign on his property until he gets a fine, or
Right.
until he gets a notice saying that, hey, all of a sudden, you know, we're telling you you've got a problem here
Yeah.
that he never would have known about.
And-
So there's got to be something that we can do. I
Well,
like the idea of maybe some sort of requirement that they have to
Yes,
get
but-
and hand in the paperwork. And then the question, I guess that also gets begged here is these signs that are already up, are they grandfathered in?
We'll have to discuss that with the attorney, get an attorney's opinion when the commission votes on whatever language. But functionally, also think about, 30 days out, if signs, the proliferation, they just start growing up, zealous
Yeah.
people. Okay, we're gonna code enforce the property owner, gonna give them 10 business days. Then, okay, you haven't complied, now we're gonna schedule a meeting for the next month.
Yep.
So
It's over and they're
it's,
gone.
right, so it's,
Let me
we don't
ask
wanna
this-
create something where we're doing work for free, we're having this process, but we also wanna do something that is really, at the end of the day, gonna be effective, so.
May I ask really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because this
Go
is
ahead.
not my focus area here, but, what, have we looked at how we define political signs, or is that just defined by the election laws? Because there are some signs that are up, but they don't say elect, they don't
Yeah,
say
they don't say-
anything,
yeah, they
they
just
just
say-
say, here's who I
Yeah.
am.
Mike
Those
Rumor for
don't-
Senate.
Those aren't subject to
But you don't know
this?
when the
Those
election.
are exactly what we're talking about.
They
So
are
exactly.
exempt.
No,
Okay.
Those are exempt? It
No,
says
they're not,
for-
those are considered political signs.
They are?
Yes, if it's not a political sign, then it's a real estate sign.
Oh,
And
so
they didn't
either
go
way
through the
you give
process
it.
and we can, yeah, but
Okay.
it's considered a political sign. And same, axe the tax, referendum type stuff, that would be political sign.
They all
Remember
say
that?
vote
How old
or
are
we
you?
elect.
What was that guy's name? Anyway, Scott, you're up.
Okay. I actually like the approach, the limited approach, conservative approach that you're taking. I think you have to decide, I think if you open Pandora's box and you create a whole myriad of election sign law, as you said, it's unenforceable. I think, as one of the people that spoke before the commission on this, you're addressing 80% of the problem, which is the city doesn't want political signs up year-round when there's nowhere near an election. If there is an election imminent within 90 days, I think getting into, well, here's 3 political signs, and one person put a sign there that doesn't have permission, and the other 3 have permission. That wasn't the original purpose of this request. And I think that's, as you said, extra unpaid work. So I like this. I recommend it.
The question I was thinking of, you know how we, and this may be totally wrong, right? We create special permits for, say, beer vendors on somebody else's property, right? Like when they come to Founder's Day and they put their trailer, they get a special permit for that. And that permit is against the beer dude, not the park, right?
Yeah, I know where you're going. I just think to be the first city or potentially first jurisdiction to try to make money off political signs.
We don't
Not
have
the
to
only
charge
one.
anything for the permit,
But
right?
that's the work we're doing for free then.
But I think that's where you can, on the backside
Right.
though, make the terms of, you know, you have to close the permit out at the end of the, 5-day cycle.
Right.
And if it's not, then that's where a fine or whatever,
Right,
right?
right.
But I mean, it would only be specific to these 33 square, whatever these
Right,
signs are
right.
that need that type of
Yeah,
action.
right.
I get it. Is any other questions for staff? So say the 2 proposed changes one more time. So right now,
Okay,
what we're
right
only
now,
talking about.
currently in the land development code, there is no early date, there's no date for, so we are adding 90 days.
Yep.
We are only amending the 48 hours to 5 days.
Uh-huh.
So this will somewhat mimic the county, which is 90 days and 10 days. We will be 90 days and 5 days.
Okay. Can we ask for maybe some sort of recommendation to say this starts on the day that it's approved? Any signs that are up now before the 90-day period of an election in this cycle need to be taken down?
Yes.
I would expect that. There's no Florida law. There's not Florida law on signs that allows a political sign to be up. For instance, there's not a preemptive law like we're getting with Airbnbs and we're getting with ALFs and we're getting with home-based businesses. So therefore, those typically say if before 2011, if you did not have any criteria, they're grandfathered in.
Yep.
I don't think that exists. So I think when we adopt this, they are now, they're non-conforming.
Yep.
And they're not legally non-conforming, they're non-conforming. Well, I don't know, are they
Well,
legally
that-
non-conforming?
That's gonna be my next
I don't know,
question.
that's a good question,
I was gonna
because
say,
there's no
that's gonna be
date.
where the question is.
There's no date.
What's the teeth to this?
It's
The teeth is in our land
supervisor
development
election.
code, so it is code enforceable.
But you can't go on the
the
property.
You're gonna
legally
go to
non-conforming-
property.
No, when this started, Mr. Chair, before we started the research of the ordinance, where I started was I called the supervisor of elections. And their answer is, if a city has an ordinance and a candidate subject to their rules is in violation of their ordinance, they will ask the candidate to comply. That's
Who is
their,
they?
the supervisor of elections, the Orange County
Now-
Supervisor of Elections.
Now, my
So their
question-
answer was, we would do something except the signs and the candidates are in compliance with the current city ordinance. And that's where this started with, well, what is our ordinance and do we have the right to change it? And will then the supervisor of elections?
And I do have one question on that, and I'm getting really picky here, and you could tell me I'm out of order. But my question would be, if you are running for the local election, you would be under the local, city laws for running for office. But if you are running for federal office, are you?
It'd be November.
Right, but
There-
the
or
thing,
whenever,
right,
if
but,
there's a
but the thing
runoff
is,
or
do you fall
or the-
under
not-
city ordinances, or do you fall under the
The property does.
federal?
Yes,
property
you do.
does.
They still have to put it
They
on
still
90
have to register with the supervisor of elections, and the supervisor of elections, he said, I have a copy of your city ordinance and all city ordinances right here, and what we do is confirm compliance
Yeah.
with the city ordinance.
It's based off the property, not the.
Mike, does anyone else doing this? Like Apopka, Oakland, Winter Garden?
We have, the research was done by code enforcement on the different scenarios and what we came up with, because we have so much unincorporated land that's within the city limits. The easy thing is, you see a sign 90 days before a city election. If it's a somebody running for city election, you know, before what's before the November? You have
The
the
primary.
primaries, yeah.
Primary.
So 90 days, you know, to say which corner, you know,
Okay.
oh, I didn't know I had an Apopka address, I didn't know I was city, you know. So it's just easy, we're gonna mimic the beforehand, the county. And so, so I'm gonna tell you this, let's just say this. Most likely, the signs that are there are gonna be good, they're gonna be there, and then it's gonna be 90 days before the election, and then after the election, we'll get rid of them. And then
next
start
year
from
start
new,
over.
and then we'll,
And how did we come up with 90 days?
that's what the county has.
The county, okay.
County, Orange County.
That's fairly common. I've seen 45 days, and I've seen 60 days. 90s a little bit, that's, you know, more. Most counties are 60 days. Like Henderson County, I think there's another one is the Miami-Dade. I think there's a 60 days.
All right, I'm gonna open it up to the public. There's nobody here, so we're gonna close it to the public, bring it up back to the dais. I need a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve this Land Development Code amendment to the Ocoee Land Development Code for political signs.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. And can we add a condition to it?
We don't add conditions. We add
Add a
recommendations.
recommendations to it. And the only one, if it were to, would be the one that get landowner permission submitted to the city. It seems like that was something that the city
Okay.
would be apt to do.
All right, we have a motion by Member Kennedy for approval of the political sign ordinance, and a second by Vice Chair Mellon with a recommendation of what he said. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Okay, the next item.
Can a second add a recommendation to a motion?
We were doing it in Orange County.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why
What?
do we do that? Yeah.
I adopt the
Okay.
And I second.
Thank you. Only because of the way you worded that, I
So-
just wanted to make sure.
I have a motion for the adoption of the recommendation and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We're good.
Okay, the next item is, we currently are under a moratorium for self-storage facilities in the city. And, the, sort of the background to this was, a lot of, there's areas in the city that are, like, along the 429, which isn't a character area, has a lot of vacant land, but there's other areas that have parcel-based vacancy. And we were getting pressure to do self-storage facilities on those parcels, and we still, to this day, have a direction from the commission to try to get restaurants. We have our third standalone restaurant being constructed, the Sonny's, in the city. And so there's been a couple of properties that are the buts. Well, we don't want self-storage, but this is building out, finalizing the last parcel in the development. So we just wanted to get a better understanding of self-storage. What's sort of the trend? What's the carrying capacity out there? And so we put a moratorium which ends at the end of March. And so during that time, in our research, we found that self-storage, like many businesses, you follow where the funding is, and there's funding for self-storage, there's saturation and oversaturation. But the basic premise on the rule of thumb is per capita, per resident, 5 to 7 square feet across the US is the normal carrying capacity for self-storage. So with the city, and the state of Florida is on the higher end, closer to 10 square foot per person, because we do not have basements readily available in Florida, and we have a larger mobile home population in the state of Florida. So if you went and took the 10, the city's census came in at just under 49,000, rounded up to 50,000, at 10 square foot, 500,000 square foot within a 3 to 5 mile radius. The city, within the city limits, we have existing coming out of the ground, recently approved to be built, 700,000 square foot. And so that gave me enough information to say, and there's several facilities right on the edge of the city as well. So if you take those 3 and 5 miles, you're gonna get more square foot than the 700,000.
What does that break down per Ocoee citizen?
14.
14.
So what I'm proposing in the land development code is, so existing, in the C3 and in the I1 zoning, self-storage is permitted. Unless you're in a character area, like the CRA target areas, the State Road 429 character areas, and the downtown, it says in C3 and I1 that self-storage can only be permitted if it's in a mixed-use development, not up fronting the road, no more than 35%. So if you had a development, you had all these different uses, and then in the very back corner you didn't know what to do, you could do a little bit of self-storage. Doesn't say it has to be climate indoors, it just, and so there is that provision in my update. I'm still keeping that. There's an opportunity in mixed use. You may do some sort of a self-storage. Maybe there's a way they can cover storage. The wholesale changes, what we're doing is we're gonna make it like a daycare or a church to say, we're not gonna permit it outright in any, we're not gonna prohibit it in all the districts, but in the C3 and I1, if you wanna do a self-storage, it is now going to be a special exception. So they can, on a case-by-case basis, make their pitch, we can review it, maybe there's some more of those butt properties out there, we don't want them, but. Now when I say we don't want them, the knock on them is they employ very few people. The very few boots on the ground type of person, they're going to automation, and they generate a low number of trips. And so in some projects, if they have leftover land, that may help them to develop, create tax base, but they can't take any more trips. That's where you have that mixture in a mixed-use development in the back, it might be appropriate. But to take one of our very important parcels that we need a standalone restaurant, we need a plaza with a restaurant and a brewery, and we need office space. We're not losing it all to daycares, and we're not watching your kids, your boxes, and your parents. That's what the flavor of the past few years is: daycares, ALFs, self-storage. So we're gonna keep the ability there in a character area as a mixed use. Everywhere else in C3 and I1, it's gonna be a special exception. The other zonings, it's prohibited. A lot of jurisdictions allow them in C2. We moved it to C3 and I1, really primarily in that 50 corridor. There's some pockets, but that's what we're proposing today to amend.
So we're finally realized that self-storage doesn't belong on the frontage where we can have consumer goods.
Yes.
After all these years.
After the first 700,000 square feet.
You know what I mean?
Finally, I've been
I
telling
never
this man
understood
for
that.
3 years.
You have a nice corner lot, and
but I'll
here's a
tell you
self-storage
though,
lot.
but
Right.
self-storage is an indication
Yeah.
of what's happening.
Correct.
It's an indication of somebody that will pay to have their stuff. They're moving
absolutely.
into a smaller unit and they have their stuff. It's not as much necessarily the junk that's being stored.
Oh, absolutely. It's you have to have growth to have
But it is
self-storage.
showing that we are having a populace that is, as everywhere else is exploding with new
Yeah, but
development.
you've discussed this before. It needs to be our populace. We don't need to be the storage,
We don't need people.
self-storage center for adjoining
Yes.
populace.
Exactly.
Per capita keeps
Yes.
it
Mhm.
our residents.
Yes, sir.
Serving our residents.
Does anybody have any questions for staff? I'm gonna open it up to the public. Nobody wants to speak. We're gonna close the public, bring it up to the dais. I need a motion.
So, Mr. Chair, I move that we recommend approval of the amendment to the Land Development Code, sections 5-8A of Article 5 relating to self-storage facilities.
Table 5-1.
Table 5-1.
There.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second. Okay, I was pointing at you, you want it?
We have a motion from Member Williams to approve and a second by Member Forges. I just want to make sure I'm clear about this, right? And I think I am. Any self-storage wants to come in, they need to get a special exception.
Unless they're in one of the overlays. The two in the CRA, the character areas along the 429.
Right,
There can be a part of a master development,
right.
mixed-use development, no more than 35%, and they cannot be, that use cannot be up on the road, it has to be in the rear.
So they cannot be in the character areas.
yes.
Anywhere else that is C3 or I1, they
It's a
have to have
special
a special
exception.
exemption. There's no way to
Special
get 'em-
exception.
God bless America. There's no other way to get them in,
No
right?
other way,
They have
yes.
to come up in front of the
Yes.
city commission. Perfect. I have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Okay, miscellaneous.
Got any questions for me? What's going on?
Think.
On with development-wise?
So, city centers going apartments versus condos?
City center was always apartment or condos. There was never, there's no
Or.
change. Yeah. Well, they're
We're
not,
gonna have condos
they're
in
not, they
back.
can't be townhomes, and they're built up above the second floor. So there's short-term rental, there's apartments, they could condo. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. There's no apartment yard. There's no, it's all, whether it's you own the space between the walls or whether you rent, doesn't matter. It's up above, so.
Are we gonna see the property that was approved the other night for sale? Will that have the one on Taylor Street in Kissimmee? Will we ever see that, you think?
No, it'll be under 25,000 square feet.
You have any talks of any users for the first floor yet?
Well, no, but you know, these mixed-use developments, we're in a very new downtown.
Yep.
Downtowns are being revitalized. The funding for those types of projects are a little bit different. They're gonna have to make a decision, and how do you construct it? Because what's gonna go on the second floor with say it's a 14,000 square foot, 2-floor building. Okay, to build out 6 apartments up there, if they could get all that be office space. So really, our first goal is to get an urban building. Second, with architecture. So it's kind of, the building sets the place. So the uses in it, we're not going to designate. You have to have a restaurant. You have to have an office. It's gonna be constructed as such that it's mixed use, so it's not gonna just be stick for apartments, so.
Good. Does anybody else have any questions for Mike?